Hey TJ, I have been thinking about the question you posed to me on Tuesday, and there's a lot to say, and I'm really tired and I don't want to type it, so I thought that I would just send a video. So I hope you've got time to watch it, and I appreciate you asking me, and it's been great reminiscing about the things that I love about Britain. And I don't know how you're going to put these into a garden design, so I wish you all the luck in that, because that's not my area of expertise. So I'm going to leave that up to you, the expert. But I've got a lot of thoughts about the things that are awesome about Britain, because there are a lot of them, and it's a place I love. So first off, there's obviously there's the iconic symbols, the flag, the queen, the sheep, islands, favorite foods, beautiful accents, cute words, castles. There's all of those things that most people, I think, throughout the world know and recognize immediately with Britain. But everything else for me fell into three different categories. I'm gonna have to put my glasses on because I'm getting old and I can't read my notes without them anymore. So yeah, aren't they cute? So the other things fall into three different areas of things that I think are really important about Britain: nature, history, and the personality and values of the people. So first, for nature, because I think that's really, really, really important, especially to your garden design. The water element, because Britain is obviously an island. Water is definitely important and part of the iconic things that people know about Britain. There's the beautiful rivers and the white cliffs. All of that to me says Britain. Also, and I think a lot of the things that I've thought about are in comparison to what I know, which is obviously the US. And so definitely Britain has much more defined cities, which also gives much more defined country. And with those very defined borders, I think there's a much more authentic feel to each. Definitely with less suburban sprawl than here and what I'm used to and where I live now. But because of that, it gives the beautiful natural settings of the countryside with things like yellow rapes, which we don't have here. And I think many people didn't even, or at least many Americans at least, don't even realize how amazingly varied the terrain is, to go from beautiful coastlines to snow-covered mountains and beautiful, beautiful geography like the Lake District is very iconic British to me. Also, at least compared to what I'm used to, again, it seems much less developed, and that things like you let nature take its own course, which doesn't happen here, at least in suburbia. I had, for example, never seen grass in a developed area go to seed. So when I walked through, I don't remember the time of the year, but at one point I walked through a church graveyard cemetery, and they'd posted a sign that said, "We let our grass go to seed because it's natural and it'll help the grass grow and rejuvenate." And here that's not done. To grow and rejuvenate, we would overseed or we would aerate. Everything's very structured and controlled almost, to the point that nature can't take its course, at least in suburbia and the cities. Of course, in the country, it can do whatever it wants, but I haven't seen it used as on purpose in a very developed area. And also things like hedges, which are so natural, but used in a way that we wouldn't use them. Well, we don't have hedges here, so of course it would be like a stone or a cement wall. So it just seems much more natural to me. And the accessibility of nature. Here in America, we have three types of parks. You either own your own land, or you have a park, a city park, a state park, a national park. And those are things that you have to have some kind of transportation to go to. You have to be able to get to it. It takes a bit of privilege to be able to access that. And I found Britain to be very accessible to nature. There was a path behind our house, and there's these public footpaths and right-of-ways, and that doesn't exist here because we don't have the history with with which those come. So the accessibility of nature is something that seems very British to me because it's so different than what I've known. And also, I've struggled with where to put national trust and in my things. Does it go in history? Does it go in nature? Does it go in personality and values? Because it seems to go in all three. But again, the accessibility of national trust houses and the lands, again, speak to the love of nature that seems greater than here because it's so much more accessible. And I'm sure there's a lot more nature that I'm leaving out, but those are the things that come to mind that are really important to me. History, the fact that you have 5,000 years of history, right, that happened on that land. We probably do too, but only 240 of it is recorded and spoke about and taught in schools and learned and understood. So anything beyond that time period to me seemed very fictional, almost like something I'd read about, like being on the moon or Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It didn't even seem real. So things like castles and Tudor houses and a 400-year-old pub seemed a bit of fiction. So when I got there and experienced, you just can't experience that here. There's no building that's that old. So the fact that the history is loved and respected and understood was a completely new experience. And I think that is very important to Britain. It also is very much like a motherland. It is my culture. It's where my family originated, and so that beyond my 243 years of history in America, that rest of it is there, and so it's very related to that. And I think that relates to much of the world, since Britain has invaded, what did I read, half of the world, that so many people have a connection to it, makes it very powerful in that way. Also, respect that people have for those old structures. Here, something's 20 years old, we tear it down and start over, so we don't develop that history over time. And again, that's how I think the national trust playing into that, that people respect that very much. Also, here in America, there has not been war on our land since the Civil War. So in 150 years, there hasn't been any war here. So people don't have the experiences to talk about like I had there. People are able to tell you that. And there aren't evidences of war, of immediate war recently. So for example, there you might see a crater in a park, or rivets in a building that were from World War II. And here, that didn't exist. So again, that seemed very fictional to me, and being there made it real. But I think for British people who experience that every day, you can walk past those buildings every single day and see that and remember that. So I think there's much more of a closeness to that history, the history of war, than we have here. It does seem very remote, very far away. Even though many Americans died and were involved in it, and families can tell you about that, it wasn't here, and that makes it seem different than I think the experiences of you as a British person. So that history plays into it as well. So finally, my favorite part is the personality of the people and the value system that I perceived, may or may not be true, but it's what I perceived to be different versus Americans and what I've grown up knowing. First off, we talked about the respect for history and the knowledge of history. That love of history doesn't exist in most people. Most people don't care about it. Most people don't know it. It's not taught well in schools. We don't have much of it to teach. And we're very self-centered in that way, and that we don't really care about the rest of the world of history. Yes, we have American history, and it is taught in schools, and yes, we have world history, but it's not done well. And so we don't respect it enough to even teach it well. I perceived that British people are less controlling than Americans in my previous experience. And maybe it comes down to the difference in the evangelical nature of Americans, at least my experience in the Bible Belt, not necessarily my own family, but just the experience of my community and teachers. And I think even relating to, say, your independence with animals, there's nowhere that I can take my dog other than my own garden where my dog can be off leash. Some parks will have a dog area, and it's like a little fenced in area where your dog can run off leash, but otherwise your dog must be on a leash at all times to be legal, either on your own land or on a leash. And so that tends to make us more controlling. And so, for example, dogs, I found that dogs there were much better behaved because they were given that choice. They were given freedom to run away, but they chose to come back. So they were given the free will to make those choices. And here, my dog will never have that choice. She can't. So she relies on me to pull her back. And so I think, I don't know how that's going to relate to your garden design. It probably doesn't. But I do think that British people tend to be less controlling in those ways. I'm also just watching a show called This Farming Life, which is about Scottish croft farmers. Really interesting. And just to see the beauty and the nature, the naturalness of how they raise these animals and how croft farming relies on the community to share resources. And maybe there's some out west that do that, but here it's all for one. You're on your own, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, suck it up. And I find in general, there tends to be this sense of community that I haven't seen as much here. And also the farmers would put their sheep on this, one farmer put the sheep on the island for 8 months every year. And so the trust that he had to put his sheep out and just let them be, we don't do that with our animals. They're much more controlled. They're going to be in a barn with a million other sheep, but they're not going to have this beautiful life that the animals there had. And I'm sure they don't all have that way, and I'm sure that some here do. But in general, I think there's a greater portion there of animals there that just have more independence and where the people are less controlling. And along the same lines, I think that British people have a tendency to let others be and make their own choices. For example, abortion and marriage. Here, people have very strong opinions about abortion and marriage and premarital sex. And I have never, again, from the Bible Belt, all of my friends are married or have been married, many of them before children or even before the pregnancy. So that was different being in Britain, where many people were either not married or in a relation, interracial marriages, or there just seemed to be more mixing than I had witnessed in my Bible Belt American families. And I love that. I love the openness and the acceptance that comes with that, and the trusting in other people. Right, and the people were more inclusive, especially in the cities, definitely different, more inclusive of race, sexual orientation, and religion. Although, again, not everyone, and I think that maybe America is exporting some right-wingness, and this may be spreading across Europe and the world, and I'm sorry for that. I also find that British people are smarter. They seem to be smarter and less brainwashable. Maybe that comes down to being less evangelical. Again, I don't know how that relates to your design, but I started thinking and my brain just went crazy. I find that tends to be a little less commercialized and more natural. I think that British people are hardier. You have to deal with those harsh winters and lack of sunlight in the winter, and the winds. And so I think maybe that might relate to some hardiness. at least for some people. I think in general, this one I do think is true, that British people tend to be more global. You've traveled more, you read more, you get more news from other sources. I think the BBC does an excellent job of bringing in news from around the world. And here, our news is very much focused on US, very little international reporting of news. And I think it speaks to people really don't care as much. We are much more self-centered. And then there's the Fox, not news, but called news, which brainwashes people anyway. But finally, my favorite personality trait of the British is putting community over self. And I'm sure it doesn't apply to everyone, and maybe I've hyped it up greater than it is, but I do get the feeling that people really care about their community. They care that everyone gets health care. They know that that is a very important aspect, and that the society as a whole is better off because of it. That there is accessibility to nature, and even though that means someone might be walking through a farmer's field, it is important that everyone has that access. Gun control, it's so frustrating here, that people are willing to give up guns at for the greater good. The death penalty, just the vacation allotment and the amount of time that people get off for vacations, that speaks to the wellness of the workforce. And final example, maternity leave, 6 weeks here tops. So anyway, I love Britain. I'm happy to answer any questions or give you more details about anything. I don't know if it's helped you with your garden design or not, but those are the things that I love about Britain, and I miss them, and I'm glad to get back over. Love you. Bye.